Congressman from the 4th District, Chris Smith. October 28th, there's an anniversary of a piece of legislation which many folks are not familiar with, but many are, and it's had tremendous impact on folks all across the world. Can you share that landmark legislation and what it means to folks today and what its impact has been over the years?
Thank you very much, Terrence, and thanks for that very kind intro. On October 28th, we will be celebrating 20 years of signing into law of a law that I wrote. It's called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. It is an historic law that is a whole of government approach to try to end modern day slavery, both here in New Jersey, our country, and around the world. It is one of those laws that takes every part of our government, from the Justice Department to HUD to Labor HHS and all the different parts of our government, and says we need a unified strategy with programs that both prevent trafficking in the first place, protect the victims, and prosecute the predators and the perpetrators of these heinous crimes. Trafficking has exploded all over the world, including right here in New Jersey. I remember, when I started thinking about what can we do to mitigate and hopefully to combat this effectively. That was around, when the Soviet Union was breaking up, and then we saw that with the internet and with increasingly people moving across borders very, very easily, and organized crime exploiting that whenever they could. Women were being turned into commodities for sale. Women and children were being sold in chattel slavery, or where they couldn't leave. And they were being raped in many cases multiple times every day. And most people just didn't know what was going on. Most people in law enforcement didn't have a clue. And I love law enforcement, very big supporter of our police. But generally speaking, until the law, we had no real law to combat human trafficking. And this is both labor and sex trafficking. So 20 years later, thousands of people have been prosecuted, the bad guys who commit these heinous crimes. Tens of thousands of people have been liberated and rescued, mostly women and children. And on the prevention side, we've been working overtime to make people situationally aware so that they don't become victims themselves, particularly our young people. We know that many of the runaways in this country very often are grasped at train stations and elsewhere, bus stations, and very quickly trafficked and exploited. So my last law, and I've done 5 now on combating human trafficking, the last one has everything to do with training up our young people in an age-appropriate way. It sets up curriculums for our schools, and that's being rolled out right now. COVID has slowed it a little bit, but it's still rolling out into our school system. So it's a very big emphasis on those 3 Ps: prosecution, protection, and prevention.
And, let me ask you a quick question. You referenced schools, and I volunteer in a school board in Homedale Township on the Homedale Board of Education. And the important curriculum of slavery is a topic of discussion of late throughout the country. And that goes into historic slavery from hundreds of years ago. But quite literally, you referenced a moment ago curriculum about the important topic that you're discussing. Modern day slavery is happening right now, right in front of us. And
yes.
Right. And so can we speak a little bit to how that curriculum would impact on modern day slavery to help inform the students of today of what to look for, what to see, how to act, and how to report inappropriate conduct as they see it to help their own generation, the next generation?
It's a great question. And, obviously we need to remember chattel slavery. It is an abomination as it was practiced. Thankfully, it has largely ended, although there are some countries where it's still a problem, very much not with government support. But modern day slavery, again, the buying and selling of women and children, it has skyrocketed. The gangs are into it big time. Again, it's a way of getting money to do their nefarious things that they do. And of course, organized crime. And then there's others who just, part of it is the entitlement society, where people think they can have access to a woman, exploit her, and then just go on as if nothing has happened. What most people don't realize is that there's an element of force, fraud and coercion involved with where that woman is being exploited. And my law makes it so that it is actionable to go after those who commit these crimes, whether it be the buyer or the pimp. And there's also, if they have not attained the age of 18, one single commercial sex act, and that woman is considered a trafficking victim, and the person can be prosecuted very extensively. Those who, again, commit this slavery like action. So situational awareness is key. Making sure that we say slavery is in the past when it comes to certain kinds of slavery, but it is a very, very real problem today. The International Labor Organization suggests that about 40 million, there's different estimates, people worldwide are captivated by slavery, modern day slavery. 1 in every 4 victims are children. So there's a huge disproportionately largest number are women or the girl child, and then of those, 1/4 happen to be children. We're seeing a very dangerous trend as well, simultaneous with all this, of exploiting young boys. And there have been a number of studies done, including one that included Atlantic City by the Justice Department, that found almost half, different numbers from different studies are young minor boys. So this is cruelty in the extreme. The lives of these individuals are hurt for the rest of their lives. That's why shelters are so important. That's why a faith-based focus on helping them realize you were victimized. You're not at fault. You didn't cause it. You may have been deceived initially, and that happens, for those who they think they're getting a job as an au pair or as a model or whatever it might be, and next thing you know, they find they're being drugged and forced into the slave trade. So it's a horrible problem. I've written 5 laws to combat it. The first, as you pointed out, was the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which now celebrates its 20th year. And every year, just for example, and people might want to go and check this out, because it applies both domestically and internationally, the State Department does what's called the TIP report, Trafficking in Persons Report. It is a big, thick book that looks at the 3 Ps, prevention, prosecution, and protection, for every country. And if a country is not meeting standards, they are sanctioned. And many countries that have been put on the sanctions list work overtime to get off it, and they close brothels and take some very effective actions to get off to what we call Tier 3 egregious violator.
Well, and Chris, let me speak to that for a moment. You had, and for folks who don't know Chris Smith, when we were preparing for this discussion, he had a book dropped off to what was called to leaf through a little bit to get ready. That book is over 500 pages long, and it's the annual report on trafficking, which reviews each and every country in the world. And the tiers that you would reference, and the tiers and the Tier 2 watch list, and particularly egregious, the Tier 3, those countries are listed as well. And I thought it was very interesting and disturbing that China is listed as a Tier 3 country. So no great shock then that the Chinese Communist Party had sanctions on Chris Smith for your work on human rights. Can you talk to us a little bit about that a little bit? And I'd also like to talk to you about the fentanyl issue. Opioid addiction is such an extensive problem. We're losing folks every single day in this country, right in New Jersey, right in our own towns. And this ties to international trafficking and ties to fentanyl, doesn't it?
Oh, it is. It's all interrelated. And, during the Obama administration, I tried repeatedly to get China placed on the Tier 3, which is, again, the egregious violator list. And except for an automatic downgrade that was prescribed by the law, they wouldn't do it. And I pointed out that there's probably no country on earth where there are more women who are bought and sold than the People's Republic of China. They bring women in from all over, particularly countries in proximity to mainland China, exploit them. There are missing many hundreds of, not hundreds, tens of millions of girls because of the forced abortion program there, and there's a boy preference, so girls are systematically eliminated and exterminated in China. It's called the one child, now two child per couple policy, where one has to get a authorization from the government in order to have a child. I mean, that is absurd that the government should intrude in such a way, and it leads to if ultrasound shows that it's a girl being carried by the mom, very often that child is killed. So they're missing 60 million or more women, girls, the girl child who would be there. Fast forward to right now, that means that the traffickers have an engraved invitation and a great deal of incentive to bring young women in from other places and to have them cruelly exploited. I have had 66 hearings on human rights abuse in China. Some of them, many of them had a focus, some whole or in part, on this whole issue of trafficking, both labor and sex trafficking in China. They have concentration camps. As we all know, it's genocide against the Uyghurs, the Muslims, but it's everywhere under Xi Jinping, the current dictator. On fentanyl, I had a hearing and I have a bill pending. I just can't seem to get the House to take it up. On the issue of fentanyl, they are exporting. If China wants to stop fentanyl exportation to the United States, they can do it tomorrow. Most of the fentanyl that's killing our young people comes from China, sometimes transshipped through Mexico, but it's coming from China. So I had a hearing and I had the DEA and others there. And while the Chinese government will make some noise and say, oh, we're working with you to try to mitigate this problem, they don't do it.
Why not?
They have a problem with methamphetamine addiction in China itself. They are cracking down on that like you wouldn't believe. But this fentanyl is for export. And what they're doing is simply saying, "Oh, we're going to do something," and they don't.
Why not, though?
And it means that people are being poisoned.
Many of the biggest problems have very simple solutions. They just simply require leaders to make decisions, to carry them out, and move on to the next topic. So, why would China not want to do that which is right in this regard, in many other regards as well? But that seems like a very simple thing.
That's a great question. The Chinese people are tremendous people. I have worked the Chinese human rights issue for 40 years. I know many of those in Hong Kong. I know many who have been in the gulags, Harry Wu and all these great people, but Wei Jingshang. Right now, one of my friends is being targeted by the Chinese Communist Party in this country, Bob Fu, a pastor who has spent time in prison for his belief, for his Christianity beliefs. These are the best of them and the brightest and the bravest in China, and they're often in the gulags because that's what the Chinese Communist Party does. But the Chinese Communist Party, and that's what we're talking about, not the Chinese people, have anything they can do to disrupt, hurt, and even kill. They're not going to do anything to stop it. Look what they do in their own prisons. Torture is pervasive and endemic throughout all of China. If you're arrested because of your faith in God, whether you be a Muslim, a Tibetan Buddhist, Falun Gong practitioner, Christian, Catholic, whatever it might be, if you're arrested, you are going to be tortured and horribly tortured. I've had hearings on it. We had one woman who was tortured and she escaped, the mother of three, from Xinjiang, which is the Muslim area, which is now being cracked down with a genocide by Xi Jinping. And she said she prayed to God that she would die. She just couldn't take it. And they laughed at her for her faith as they were torturing her. And that is something we hear from so many. The human rights activists in Hong Kong, Joshua Wong, who's a friend of mine, I had him at a press conference last year. I'm the prime author of the Hong Kong Human Rights Act. It passed the House, went over to the Senate. They sent back identical version, but with a different name on it. It was signed by the president, and he is implementing it faithfully, sanctioning those Chinese Communist Party leaders who are doing all of this terrible, terrible things to the democracy activists in Hong Kong. They do it in mainland China as well. Every place you turn, China is horribly mistreating its own people and exporting its governance, its bad governance model. And many of the countries that are immediately in proximity to China are very fearful, from the Philippines everywhere, about this hegemony being practiced by the PRC. Their military is building up exponentially. They've been doing it for years. You look what they're doing in the South China Sea in terms of appropriating area and saying they own it, challenging even the U.S. Navy over and over again there. It's a very volatile situation. And the only thing they respect, I say again, the only thing is strength. Any perception of weakness or vacillation or kowtowing will be exploited to the nth degree. And thankfully, the president has been very strong. Secretary of State Pompeo has been very strong. And I've written laws, whether and bills and amendments with regards to the Chinese human rights abuse, which is second to none in the world. For a long time, they were on in a race to the bottom with North Korea, which commits horrific crimes as well. But in pervasiveness, magnitude, and threat to the outside world as well, there's no other example like China. Yes, there's Iran and all these other countries, Russia, that pose significant threats. But I would argue that China poses an existential threat to the region, which could easily balloon to other areas. And I argue, Bill Clinton, back in May of 1994, delinked human rights with trade. I had thought, because he was all for the human rights policies of linking trade with human rights as a lever, I supported him. I spoke out repeatedly in press conferences in favor of President Clinton. And then on May 24th, 1994, late in the day, it was a Friday afternoon, he announces that he's delinking human rights. There's no conditionality anymore to our trading relationship and human rights. That's when the Chinese government, in my humble opinion, took the measure of that government run by Bill Clinton and said, all they care about is the almighty buck. And we threw, as a country, and with Clinton walking point, the greatest people on the earth who suffer in prisons and suffer horrible tortures because they just want democracy. They just want universally recognized human rights as prescribed by treaties that have been signed and acceded to, including the Universal Human Rights, going back to the beginning of the United Nations. China says they're all for that, and they don't respect any of it. So I am very, very concerned about the fentanyl and what it's doing. Like I said, I've had hearings in the Congress about it. I had the former Monmouth County prosecutor testify. We need to do more on that to stop the flow because heroin, opioids, others are being laced with fentanyl, and it's such a toxicity that it often kills those who take it.
And that also brings it back to Congressional District 4. Most folks are busy. They're not focused on the different machinations of national government or state government. Their concern is their families from the front door to the mailbox. For the person who's listening to this video podcast, they should be engaged and thinking about and understanding this dynamic, this world dynamic. Why?
Well, I think, what happens overseas could have a very significant impact here. What happens in China? I mean, we want China to matriculate from dictatorship to a robust democracy. Then we have nothing to fear. It's like Taiwan. Taiwan is a great country and very industrious people, just like mainland Chinese people are very industrious, but they are crushed by the Chinese Communist Party, just like Hong Kong, which was doing very well. And then Xi Jinping broke all of the promises that were made during the transfer of Hong Kong to China from the UK in 1997. They've agreed to treaties, and they're breaking it all. What happens over there could not only affect here, it could affect it very, very profoundly, including the possibility of warfare. And that, peace is the ultimate agenda, to protect, make sure that our men and women in uniform are not deployed in war, because you've done enough on the deterrent side and the diplomatic side to make peace more likely. And we're up against a very determined Xi Jinping. He's committing right now genocide in plain view. The New York Times and a number of others have documented that it all has come from him, this crackdown that's going against the Muslims of what's called Xinjiang region of China. They're doing it against all the others too, the Tibetan Buddhists, the Catholics and the Christians are being crushed. Xi Jinping, I wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post a couple of years ago, and it was that world leaders need to speak out because religious freedom is being eviscerated by Xi Jinping. He calls it synodization. Everything has to comport with communist ideology or your faith as an individual or as a church, will find itself in the gulag,
Unbelievable. That's
being tortured.
unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. And they're rewriting the Bible. They're doing all kinds of terrible things. And if not confronted, and our greatest diplomatic weapon is trade. And we need to step up to the plate as never before.
And Chris,